There is a specific rule in the underground that everyone knows but no one speaks about. You respect the yellow line. For 10-year-old Camila, standing at the very edge of the subway platform, that rough, painted strip was the only thing separating the mundane world from the void. The tunnel ahead was a mouth of darkness, exhaling the stale, warm breath of a city that never sleeps. While the commuters around her checked their watches and shifted their weight in a collective, anxious dance, Camila was absolute stillness. The roar of the incoming train began as a vibration in the soles of her sneakers before it became a sound. It was a deafening, metallic scream that usually made people step back, but Camila didn't flinch. In the suffocating, flickering fluorescent light of rush hour, where every face is usually a blur of anonymity, she was doing the one thing a child is taught never to do. She was watching. In a city of 8 million people, she was the only one small enough and quiet enough to notice the monster hiding in plain sight. To understand why she saw him, you have to understand the noise. The subway station wasn't just loud, it was a physical assault on the senses. The turnstiles clicked like the gnashing teeth of some mechanical beast, swallowing people one by one. The air tasted of ozone, burnt rubber, and dust that had been settling since the last century. For most of us, this sensory overload triggers a natural defense mechanism. We shut down. We put up blinders. We look at our phones. We look at the floor. We look at nothing. But Camila couldn't shut it down. She felt everything. Beside her stood Sarah, her mother. You could see the weight of a double shift in the slope of Sarah's shoulders. She was holding on to the strap of her purse with a white-knuckled grip, not out of fear, but out of sheer exhaustion. Her eyes were glazed over, focused on a middle distance that promised a warm dinner and a soft bed, nothing more. She was in survival mode, and in that state, the world narrows down to the next step, the next train, the next task. She was there to protect Camila, but in that moment, she was too tired to see anything but the path home. Camila, however, had her own way of surviving the chaos. Over her ears sat a pair of large, battered headphones. They weren't playing music. She wore them to dampen the sharp edges of the world, to turn the roar of the crowd into a manageable hum. In her hands, she clutched a sketchbook with a fraying cardboard cover. This was her filter. She didn't draw superheroes or flowers. She drew what she called faces that lie. It was a habit that had gotten her into trouble before. Teachers called it an overactive imagination. Sarah called it telling stories. There had been incidents, times when Camila insisted a neighbor was sad when they were smiling, or that a stranger was angry when they were laughing. She saw the micro-expressions, the tiny cracks in the mask that adults are so good at plastering over. Over time, she had learned to build a barrier of silence. She realized that her mother's patience was a finite resource, one that was currently running on fumes. So, Camila learned to keep her observations to the paper. They had descended the long escalator minutes earlier, sinking deep into the earth. The crowd was a river of gray coats and black umbrellas, a uniform flow of humanity moving in a single, sluggish direction. It was hypnotic. But as they reached the bottom, something disrupted the pattern. It wasn't a sound. It was a movement. In a sea of people drifting aimlessly or rushing blindly, one figure moved with unnatural precision. He was slicing through the crowd, not with the frantic energy of a late commuter, but with the calculated efficiency of a shark moving through water. He didn't bump into anyone. He didn't apologize. He simply flowed into the empty spaces that opened up between bodies, as if he knew where the gaps would be before they even existed. Camila's pencil hovered over her paper. The man stopped near a concrete pillar, just outside the primary pool of light cast by the overhead fixtures. He turned, not to look at the train schedule, but to face the glass casing of the subway map. It was a mirror. He was checking his reflection. But it wasn't vanity. The way he tilted his head, scanning his own silhouette, sent a cold, sharp shiver down Camila's spine. It was the way an actor checks a costume before walking onto a stage. In that split second, amidst the thunder of the approaching train and the shuffle of hundreds of feet, the world seemed to tilt. The noise faded into the background, and all Camila could see was the wrongness of him. He was a glitch in the system, a shadow that had forgotten to blend in. And as the train brakes screeched, announcing its arrival, Camila realized with a terrifying clarity that the man wasn't waiting for a ride. He was waiting for a moment. To anyone else on that platform, he was invisible, because he was wearing the uniform of the invisible. He wore a neon orange safety vest over a dark blue jumpsuit, the kind of outfit that acts as a social force field. It tells the world, "I am working, do not bother me." And in a city where eye contact is treated like a threat, it renders the wearer part of the architecture. He was just another piece of the subway's crumbling infrastructure. But Camilla's gaze didn't scan, it dissected. She started at the ground and worked her way up. His boots were the problem. They were heavy tan work boots, the brand you buy when you need to protect your toes from falling steel. But they were a lie. They were pristine. There was not a single scuff on the leather, no gray dust settled in the laces, no dark stains of oil or subway slime that coats everything underground. They were fresh out of the box, stiff and untouched. Her eyes moved up to his hands. They were resting by his sides, relaxed, but they were wrong too. A maintenance worker's hands are usually maps of their labor, scarred, calloused, stained with grease that no amount of industrial soap can fully scrub away. This man's hands were pale and smooth, the nails clean and perfectly trimmed, hands that held pens, not wrenches. Most commuters were a dull, hazy gray to Camila, their intentions muted by the routine of the daily grind. But this man? He was a void. He was a drop of black ink in a glass of water. It wasn't a color, it was an absence, a dark spot where the light should be. It made her stomach turn, a primal reaction to something that felt predatory, like a bird noting the silence before a storm. As the platform began to fill with the evening rush, the man moved again. He didn't jostle for position near the edge like everyone else. Instead, he backed up against a tiled pillar. To a casual observer, he was just leaning, waiting for his shift to start. But Camilla looked up at the ceiling. There were 2 security cameras, black domes watching the crowd from the rafters. The man had positioned himself in the exact geometric center between their fields of vision. It was a blind spot, a sliver of privacy in the most public place on Earth. You don't find a spot like that by accident. You find it because you studied the blueprints. She tugged on her mother's coat, a sharp, urgent pull. The need to speak, to point, to say, "Look at his boots," bubbled up in her throat. Sarah looked down, her eyes weary and half-lidded. "What is it, Mills? The train is coming." "Mom, that man," Camilla started, but the words were snatched away. An express train, the one that doesn't stop at this station, came screaming through on the center track. The noise was a physical blow, a wall of wind and metallic shrieking that drowned out every conversation on the platform. The air pressure dropped, popping ears and whipping hair across faces. Camilla shouted, but her voice was just a ghost in the hurricane. Sarah just tightened her grip on Camilla's hand, bracing against the turbulence, completely deaf to the warning. The express train vanished into the tunnel, leaving a vacuum of silence in its wake. The man hadn't flinched. He hadn't shielded his eyes from the dust. He simply raised his left wrist. He stared at his watch for a long, deliberate second. Camilla, standing only 10 feet away now, saw the face of the watch clearly. The hands were frozen at 4 o'clock. It was 5:45 p.m. The watch wasn't a tool. It was just another piece of the costume, a prop selected to make him look like a man with a schedule. He wasn't checking the time, he was checking the performance. Then, the local train arrived. Its lights cut through the gloom, slowing to a halt with a hiss of hydraulics. The doors slid open with a mechanical chime. The man stepped forward, moving with that same eerie, fluid precision, and boarded the car. Camilla planted her feet, a sudden, desperate instinct telling her to stay on the platform. But Sarah saw an open spot near the door. "Come on, hurry," Sarah said, pulling Camilla's arm. Before she could protest, before she could explain about the clean boots and the stopped watch, Camilla was yanked across the gap. They stepped into the car, and the doors slid shut behind them, sealing them inside the metal box with the shadow. Once the doors slid shut, the subway car became a cage of glass and steel. The air inside was recycled and thick, tasting of wet wool, coffee breath, and the metallic tang of friction. For a child like Camilla, standing at waist height to the adults, this environment was a forest of legs and heavy winter coats. The flickering overhead lights cast a sickly green-tinged pallor on everyone, turning tired commuters into ghosts. The rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels on the track usually lulls people into a trance, a collective dissociation where everyone agrees to pretend they aren't trapped in a metal box hurtling through the dark. But Camilla wasn't in a trance. She was hunting. She gently maneuvered herself, shifting her weight until she found a small window of visibility between a businessman's leather briefcase and a woman's puffy jacket. She needed to see him. He was standing near the center pole, about 10 feet away. While everyone else leaned casually against the metal, letting the train's momentum move them, he was rigid. His hand gripped the silver pole with a tension that turned his knuckles white. It wasn't the lazy grip of someone afraid of losing their balance. It was the grip of someone ready to snap the metal in two. It was active, kinetic energy waiting for a release. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. The cardboard cover felt rough against her fingertips, a grounding texture in the sliding world. She didn't look at his face. That was too dangerous. Instead, she focused on the geometry of his posture. Her pencil scratched softly against the paper, capturing the sharp, unnatural angles of his shoulders. She drew the logo on his jacket, a generic city maintenance patch that looked slightly askew, the stitching too bright, too new. It was a costume, she realized again, a disguise meant to deflect attention, but to her, it screamed for it. She sketched the way his weight was distributed, not evenly like a commuter, but loaded onto the balls of his feet. He was a coiled spring masquerading as a tired worker. Then the train hit a rough patch of track. The car jerked violently to the left. A collective groan went up from the passengers as bodies collided. A young man with headphones stumbled, his shoulder slamming hard into the back of the maintenance worker. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. Most people would stumble, maybe apologize or glare. This man didn't stumble. In a blur of motion too fast for the tired commuters to process, he pivoted. His right leg dropped back, anchoring him to the floor, and his forearm came up in a perfect defensive block. It was a combat stance. It was the muscle memory of a soldier or a fighter overriding the actor's role. For a split second, the mask slipped completely. His eyes weren't dull and vacant anymore. They were sharp, assessing threats, calculating strike distances. Just as quickly as it happened, it was over. The man realized his mistake. He relaxed his posture, forcing his shoulders to slump, muttering a quick, low apology to the person who bumped him. But Camilla had seen it. And in that moment of movement, the beanie cap he wore had shifted slightly. Just behind his right ear, revealed for only a second, was a scar. It was jagged and pale, shaped like a lightning bolt. The sight of it hit Camilla like a physical blow. It wasn't just a scar, it was a key unlocking a door in her mind. She had seen that shape before. Not in real life, but on a screen. A flash of a news report her mother had been watching 3 nights ago. Something about a manhunt, a dangerous individual, a subway saboteur. The image had been grainy, a security camera still, but the news anchor had mentioned a distinctive scar. The memory was vague, terrifyingly incomplete, but the feeling it brought was absolute dread. This wasn't a petty thief. This wasn't just a weird man. This was the shadow. The train began to slow as it approached the underwater tunnel, the deepest, quietest part of the line. The ambient noise of the city above faded away, replaced by the crushing pressure of the river overhead. The lights in the car flickered and dimmed, plunging them into a momentary gloom. In that half-light, the man turned his head slowly. He wasn't looking at the map anymore. He wasn't looking at the floor. His gaze moved across the car, bypassing the adults, the sleeping workers, the distracted teenagers. It locked directly onto the small girl with the sketchbook. There is a specific kind of terror that arrives when the thing you are watching decides to watch you back. In the subway car's dim light, Camila didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She simply ceased to exist as a person and effectively became a statue. The man's eyes were not angry. Anger would have been human. His eyes were dead calm, flat and unblinking, like the glass eyes of a shark. He looked at her not with curiosity, but with a cold, clinical assessment. He was weighing her. Was she a threat? Was she a witness? Or just a bored child? Camila's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face remained a mask of blank innocence. When the predator looks at you, you do not run, because running triggers the chase. You do not cry, because noise draws attention. You become small. You become boring. She slowly, agonizingly slowly, lowered the sketchbook. She didn't close it. That would be a sudden movement. But she let it rest against her chest. Her mind was racing, flipping through the mental catalog of every missing poster that she had seen and newsflash she had overheard. The scar, the lightning bolt behind the ear, the pieces slammed together. It wasn't just a vague memory anymore. It was the subway saboteur. The man the news said had vanished 3 days ago after the corporate bombing downtown. The police had said he was a ghost, a master of disguise who could melt into any crowd. They said he was armed and extremely dangerous. And here he was, 3 feet away, holding a subway pole with a manicured hand. Across the aisle, the man's internal monologue was a stark contrast to Camila's panic. He saw the girl. He saw the sketchbook. He checked her off the list of threats. For a fleeting second, a pulse of adrenaline had spiked in his blood. but it dissipated as soon as he identified the source. It was just a child, a scrawny thing in a puffy coat. Children stare. It's what they do. He was a professional who had walked past SWAT teams without them blinking. The idea that a 10-year-old girl could see through a disguise that had fooled the FBI was laughable. It was arrogance, pure and simple, the fatal flaw of the perfectionist. He dismissed her, turning his gaze back to the reflection in the window, checking the time on his frozen watch. But Camila knew. The knowledge was a heavy, hot stone in her stomach. She couldn't keep this inside. The train swayed, the lights flickering violently again as they moved deeper into the tunnel. She turned to Sarah. Her mother's eyes were closed now, her head tipping forward in the heavy, nodding rhythm of deep fatigue. Sarah was gone, lost in the brief, precious oblivion of the commute. "Mom," Camila whispered. It was too quiet. The deafening roar of the tracks ate the sound. She tugged on the sleeve of Sarah's gray wool coat. "Mom, please." Sarah stirred, pulling her arm away instinctively. She shifted, her brow furrowing. Not now, Mills." "Mom, look," Camilla hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "The man, the scar." Sarah opened one eye. It was red-rimmed and unfocused. She didn't look at the man. She looked at Camilla, seeing only a fidgety, anxious child. She reached into her oversized purse, fumbling blindly until she found a small rectangular juice box. She pressed it into Camilla's hand, a silent bribe. "Drink your juice, baby. We're almost there. Just let me rest." The rejection was crushing. It wasn't that Sarah didn't care, it was that she couldn't perceive the danger. Her exhaustion was a blindfold. Camilla held the juice box, the cardboard cool against her sweating palm. She was alone in the dark. The realization settled over her like a shroud. The adults couldn't save her because the adults couldn't see. Then, the intercom crackled to life. The conductor's voice was distorted by static, but the message was clear. "Next stop, Grand Central Terminal. Transfer available to all lines." The man straightened up. The tension returned to his frame. Grand Central, the labyrinth. If he got off there, he would disappear into a crowd of thousands within seconds. He would be gone forever, and the secret would vanish with him. The train began to decelerate, the brakes screaming a metallic protest in the darkness. The train didn't just slow down, it surrendered. One moment, the rhythmic clack of the tracks was a lullaby. The next, the momentum died, and the car was left drifting in the black void between stations. The lights didn't flicker, they vanished. The sudden, suffocating darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight pressing against the eardrums. In that absolute void, the silence was louder than the roar had been. You could hear the shifting of nylon coats, the collective annoyed exhale of 50 New Yorkers, and the creak of the metal car settling on the tracks. But Camilla heard something else. In the pitch black, there was a sound that didn't belong to the stillness. It was the soft, synthetic swish of a jumpsuit moving. It was the sound of a predator repositioning in the night. 10 seconds can feel like a lifetime when you are trapped in a metal box with a monster. Camila held her breath, her hand gripping her sketchbook so hard the cardboard cover bent under her fingers. She felt the air shift, a subtle displacement of pressure that told her something large had moved into her personal space. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could disappear, wishing she was back in the safety of her bedroom. Then, the emergency power kicked in. It wasn't the full, harsh brightness of the subway car, but a dim, amber backup lighting that made everyone look like sepia-toned ghosts. And there he was. He hadn't moved away. He had moved closer. Before the lights went out, he had been standing by the center pole. Now, he was looming directly over the seated passengers, standing mere inches from where Camilla and Sarah sat. He wasn't looking at them, though. He was staring at the sliding doors, his back to them, but his proximity was a message. It was a wall of orange nylon and false authority blocking their view. He was boxing them in. Camila stared at the back of his vest. The city maintenance logo was right at her eye level now. And that's when the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The disguise wasn't just to hide his identity from the cameras. It was a key. Grand Central Terminal isn't just a station. It's a subterranean city. It has miles of service tunnels, abandoned tracks, and deep-level infrastructure that the public never sees. A man in a suit running into a service tunnel gets tackled by security. A man in a maintenance vest carrying a tool bag? He gets a nod. He gets the door held open for him. He wasn't just escaping the manhunt. He was infiltrating. The realization turned her blood to ice. If he got off at this hub, he wouldn't just disappear into the crowd on the street. he would vanish into the veins of the city itself. He could go anywhere. He could plant another device. He could hurt more people. And he was going to do it in less than 2 minutes. Camila looked at her mother. She looked so small. For 10 years, Sarah had been the shield. She had worked the double shifts, fought the landlords, and held the umbrella in the rain. She was the one who made the scary things go away. But today, the shield was cracked. Today, the protector was asleep. The weight of the moment settled on Camila's shoulders. It was a heavy, terrifying burden for a 10-year-old girl. She had been taught to be quiet. She had been taught not to make a scene, not to point, not to be difficult. Society tells little girls that their greatest virtue is their silence. But as she looked at the man's hands twitching near the pocket of his jumpsuit, she realized that silence was dangerous. Silence was what he was counting on. The train shuddered violently. The power surged back on with a hum, and the car lurched forward, picking up speed. The announcement crackled overhead. "Grand Central, next stop." The man's posture shifted. He was preparing to spring. He adjusted the strap of his bag, his muscles tightening. He was ready to walk out of that door and into the shadows forever. Camila looked at the emergency intercom button at the end of the car. It was too far. She looked at the other passengers, heads down, phones out, completely oblivious to the wolf standing in their midst. She looked at her sketchbook, at the drawing of the jagged, wrong man. Then she looked at the real man. She took a breath. It was a shaky, shallow thing, but it was enough. She stood up. The doors of the subway car didn't just open. They exploded outward, releasing the pressurized atmosphere of the train into the cavernous, echoing belly of Grand Central Terminal. The sound was a chaotic symphony of announcements, footsteps, and the murmuring of thousands. The crowd on the platform was a solid wall of humanity, a tide of commuters surging forward to fight their way onto the train while the passengers inside pushed outward to escape. It was the perfect chaos. It was the kind of visual noise that makes a single man in a maintenance vest completely invisible. He stepped out, merging instantly with the flow, his shoulder dipping as he adjusted the heavy bag that didn't contain tools. He was 3 steps away from freedom. He was 3 steps away from disappearing into the tunnels where no one would ever find him. Camila didn't think. If she had thought about it, about the consequences, about her mother's exhaustion, about the sheer, terrifying size of the world, she would have stayed seated. Instead, she let instinct take the wheel. She dropped her sketchbook. It hit the grimy floor of the subway car with a flat, final slap, landing face open on the drawing of the man with the jagged posture. In the same motion, she didn't walk to the door, she climbed. She scrambled up onto the hard, blue plastic bench seat, her sneakers leaving a smudge on the surface, rising above the sea of heads like a captain on a sinking ship. She took a breath that filled her lungs with the stale, electrified air of the station. And then, she let it out. "He has a bomb." The scream didn't sound like her voice. It sounded like something primal, a raw tear in the fabric of the evening rush. It was high and shrill, but it possessed a clarity that cut through the low rumble of the station like a knife. She pointed a shaking finger directly at the orange vest retreating into the crowd. "The man in the orange vest! That's the saboteur! He has a bomb in the bag!" The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. You have to understand the psychology of a place like Grand Central. It is an organism that relies on constant movement, but at the word bomb, the organism suffered a stroke. The radius of silence expanded outward from the train car at the speed of sound. People didn't run immediately. They froze. The tide of commuters stopped dead. 100 heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the threat. And the man stopped. It was his only mistake, but it was fatal. A true professional would have kept walking, relying on the confusion to mask his exit. But the accusation was too specific. Saboteur. That wasn't a generic panic. That was his name. Shock is a powerful force. It overrides training. He flinched, his head snapping back toward the train car, his eyes locking onto the small girl standing on the seat. In that split second, his face twisted into a snarl of pure, exposed malice. The crowd saw it. They saw the man in the vest who wasn't reacting with confusion, but with rage. The space around him cleared instantly, people recoiling as if he were radioactive. He was suddenly an island in a sea of fear. Realizing his cover was blown, the man abandoned the act. He didn't try to blend in anymore. He shoved a businessman hard into a pillar, the sound of the impact sickeningly loud in the sudden quiet. He lunged for the emergency exit stairs, moving with a terrifying, coiled speed that no maintenance worker should possess. "Stop him!" someone yelled, the spell of paralysis breaking. Transit police are a part of the landscape in Grand Central, usually standing in bored clusters near the turnstiles. But they are always watching. The commotion, the scream, and the sudden violent movement of the orange vest triggered a swarm response. 3 officers sprinted from the mezzanine, their heavy boots thundering on the tile. The man saw them coming. He dropped his shoulder, preparing to plow through the civilians blocking his path. He struck a young man who tried to grab him, delivering a precise, brutal elbow strike that sent the commuter crumbling to the ground. It was a display of violence that confirmed everything Camilla had felt in her gut, but he had underestimated the geometry of the crowd. There were simply too many bodies. As he tried to pivot, a wall of commuters, emboldened by the police presence, refused to part. He was trapped in the crush. He reached into his pocket, perhaps for a detonator, perhaps for a weapon, but he never got the chance. A tackle from a transit officer hit him from the blind side. It wasn't graceful. It was a collision of mass and momentum. The man hit the ground hard, but he didn't stay down. He scrambled up, fighting with a feral intensity, trading blows with 2 officers who struggled to contain his limbs. The maintenance bag was torn from his grip in the scuffle. It slid across the polished floor, spinning wildly until it hit the base of a trash can and tipped over. It didn't spill wrenches. It didn't spill hammers. Bundles of cash wrapped in plastic tumbled out, followed by a dense black electronic brick with wires taped to the side. The sight of it sucked the air out of the station. The fight ended not because the man gave up, but because the sheer weight of 4 officers finally pinned him to the linoleum. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp metallic finality that echoed in the silence. Camila was still standing on the seat, her chest heaving, her fingers still pointing. Sarah was awake now, standing below her, clutching Camilla's legs with a grip that left bruises, her face a mask of absolute, waking horror. She looked from the pinned man to the bomb squad rushing in, and then up at her daughter. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with the realization of how close the darkness had come. The adrenaline that had fueled the chaos began to recede, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence in the cavernous terminal. The violent kinetic energy of the arrest curdled into the rigid, flashing light geometry of a crime scene. Yellow tape bloomed like aggressive flowers across the station floor, creating a border between the ordinary world and the violence that had almost happened. The commuters were ushered away, a murmuring river of confusion, leaving the space to the crackle of radios and the heavy, rhythmic tread of the bomb squad. Camilla and Sarah sat on a wooden bench inside the safety perimeter, isolated in a bubble of stillness. Sarah wasn't sleeping anymore. The exhaustion that had defined her posture for years had evaporated, burned away by a white-hot flush of terror. She held Camilla's hand, not with the loose, distracted grip of a tired parent, but with a desperate, crushing intensity. She kept looking at the spot where the man had been pinned, then back at her daughter, her eyes wide and wet with shock. She was replaying the last 20 minutes in a loop, realizing with a sickening lurch how many times she had brushed off the warning. She had handed her daughter a juice box while a monster stood 3 feet away. The guilt was visible on her face, a new and heavy shadow to replace the fatigue. She touched Camilla's hair, her fingers trembling, as if checking that she was real, that she was still there. A man in a white shirt approached them, ducking under the tape. He looked like the station itself, sturdy, worn, and serious. The police captain didn't stand over Camilla, he knelt. He brought himself down until his eyes were level with hers, ignoring the grime of the subway floor on his uniform trousers. He held a plastic evidence bag in his hand. Inside, clearly visible, were the fake ID and the watch that was frozen forever at 4 o'clock. "They tell me you're the one who shouted," he said. His voice was gravel, but soft. "They tell me you saw the bag when nobody else did." Camila didn't speak immediately. She reached down and picked up her sketchbook from where it had fallen during the scramble. The cardboard cover was bent, and a dusty footprint smeared the corner, but the page was still open. She turned it around, presenting it to him like a piece of evidence. The drawing of the shadow man was crude in technique, but terrifying in accuracy. It captured the tension in the shoulders, the wrongness of the stance, and the jagged lightning bolt of the scar behind the ear. It was a map of hidden intent, drawn in graphite. The captain looked at the drawing, studying the lines, then looked over at the man being led away in chains by federal agents. He looked back at Camila with a shift in his expression, from professional curiosity to genuine, deep respect. "Most people look right through things, kid," he said quietly, tapping the paper. You look at them. That's a rare thing. Don't lose that. It was a validation that hit deeper than any grade on a report card. For years, her imagination had been a problem to be managed, a nuisance to be quieted. Now, it was the weapon that had saved them. The narrative of her life shifted in that cold, echoing station. She wasn't just the quiet girl who stared too much. She was a witness. In a world deafened by its own noise, where everyone is rushing to the next distraction, the quietest observers are often the only ones paying attention. The truth doesn't shout, it waits to be seen. It sits in the corner, wearing a disguise, hoping that everyone is too busy to notice the cracks in the mask. Eventually, they were cleared to leave. The ascent from the underground was a physical journey from the underworld back to the living. They took the stairs, step by step, leaving the flickering fluorescent purgatory behind them. When they pushed through the heavy doors and stepped onto 42nd Street, the night air hit them. It was cold and smelled of diesel exhaust and roasted nuts, but to them, it tasted like a promise. The sky above was a deep urban purple, devoid of stars but full of life, a stark and beautiful contrast to the suffocating tunnel they had just escaped. They walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, the subway grates rumbling beneath their feet, a reminder of the world below, but a world they were now above. Camilla reached into her pocket and pulled out her headphones. She slid them over her ears, dampening the city's roar back into a manageable hum. But she didn't close her eyes. She scanned the passers-by, watching the colors, watching the shadows. The city is full of secrets, hiding in the noise. But as long as someone is brave enough to look at them, the light wins. If you believe in the power of a quiet voice, subscribe for more stories.